As I was preparing for the conference we did on Paul and his Roman world, I was shocked by the prevalence of the bathhouse in Roman society. I never understood how all of life seemed to center around the bathhouse. And as a result of that, Paul often drew from imagery in the bathhouse to speak to people about their faith and witness as a follower of Jesus. And so as we are making some of these teachings available to you from this conference, in this episode, I unpack for us what was going on in the bathhouse, how was Paul interacting with it, and how can we draw application for our lives today. So part 4, Life in the Roman Empire, let's dig in. Everywhere you go in the Roman Empire, you find these public baths. You have them at Ostia, the port city for Rome. You have them in Philippi. You have it at Salamis on Cyprus. You have it at Petra. You have it at Perga in southwest Turkey. You have it at Masada. How many of you have seen the bathhouse at Masada? Many of you have indeed. We have them in Rome, of course, and we have them in Bath, England. And anywhere else you go, whether it is a small little outpost or a major Greco-Roman city, everywhere in the Roman Empire, you have the public baths. Here's the thing you need to know first and foremost about the public baths. They were not about hygiene. All right, they are about entertainment, relaxation, and social interaction. This is the leisure life. And one of the things that we find out is that when you go, okay, well, why would people go to the baths if it's not first and foremost to bathe, but it's about all of this? What did all of this entail? You could say this. People would visit the baths for any number of reasons: to unwind, hang out with friends, meet new friends, get a glass of wine, grab some food, conduct business, talk politics, play board games, view artwork, as many had galleries, exercise, get a massage, read, listen to lectures, have sex, paid or consensual, and yes, to bathe. Welcome to the popularity of the leisure life of the Roman baths. Now, I'm not sure how sanitary those baths would have actually been. In fact, 2 years ago, a couple of our dear friends, it may or may not have been my creative director and his wife, Mark and Tanya, invited us on a cruise, our first cruise as a family for us, on a cruise with Royal Caribbean. Okay, it was not Carnival, it was Royal Caribbean. We were thinking if we went Carnival during spring break, it would be disastrous. They said, no, if we go Royal Caribbean during spring break, it's gonna be fine. It was disastrous. It was Mardi Gras on a boat, and I haven't been to Mardi Gras, okay? In fact, I can't even take photos on the deck to actually show you, but there wasn't a single seat on the entire boat. It was jam-packed full. And I remember having conversations with my 4 kids that I was not planning to have with my 4 kids for a while yet. And on one occasion, as our kids were like trying to figure out the time of day to go down to the pool deck because everybody was hanging out there, and there was all of these hot tubs around the deck. On this deck right here, obviously sans people right now. And I remember my kids, as everything was jam-packed, going, Daddy, we want to go into the hot tub. And I'm like, no, you don't. You are staying out of those hot tubs, because I know what those college kids were just doing. I think it was a lot like that, but they didn't care about the sanitary nature. They didn't even think about that. It was all about the leisure life. Now, here's what's interesting, is that for most people, visiting the baths was a daily ritual. So men would get up early and go to work, and sometime around midday, they would head to the baths for sometimes 2, 3, 4 hours. In some places, There was demarcated times for men to go versus when women went. And so if that was the case, the women would go in the morning while the men were working, and then the women would be done and the men would go there for the afternoon. But in most of the places, or at least many of the places, the bathing did not have separate times for men or women. And in many cases, the bathing between both sexes happened nearly nude or completely nude at the bathhouse. Brad mentioned that in Greek society, they were much better or much more comfortable with nudity, not so much the Romans. That was different in the bathhouse. Now, it still remained true in some segments of society, but by and large, it was very much a place that was sensual, sexual place to hang out. In fact, many of the paintings and the sculpture were very sensual in nature. And here's the unique feature of the bathhouse. All members of society, regardless of class, could afford it. When it came to the big bathhouses, they were free. But for the rest of the bathhouses, it just required a nominal fee that virtually anybody can afford to get into. Now, when we look at Rome, the three largest bathhouses in Rome were done by emperors, Trajan, Caracalla, and Diocletian. Now, other emperors had built bathhouses before them, but these were like the three biggest bathhouses that you found in Rome. Caracalla's was 27 acres in size. Diocletian's was 30 acres in size. This is that one in Rome, and here is a model of all that it entailed in that particular structure. Now, I'm going to take you into an illustration here in just a moment so you can get a feel for what was in the bathhouse. But just a quick thing on terminology. The huge public baths were called thermae. The smaller public baths and the private baths were called balnea. Now, here's what's utterly remarkable. By the 4th century AD in Rome, Rome boasted 11 great thermae and 856 balnea. This is central to what it was to be Roman. Now, unfortunately, I do not have this illustration in your notebook because I just found it recently. But you can Google bath complex graphics or illustrations and come up with things that are very similar. This is a very rudimentary one, and it just shows the basics that you would find at nearly all bathhouses. But there would be a lot more, especially when you're dealing with the big ones. But the first thing you have here is the Apodyterium. That's where you came in and you declothed. You would take your robes, and at times you would have your togas cleaned while you were at the bathhouse, which took several hours to do, and there was a service for that. But more often than not, you would leave your clothes in the Apodyterium in a locker-like thing, which would be like a basket, or there may be a niche in the wall, and you would have the attendants watch your clothes. Now, there was a problem with theft at the bathhouse, and so if you didn't trust the attendants, you brought a slave who would watch your stuff while you went and enjoyed the bathhouses. Now, from the Apodyterium, you could either go into what is known as the Frigidarium, which is cold water pool. You couldn't swim, but you would soak, and the water would be more cold, or could be in many places a little bit more room temperature. You have then in C here what is called the Tepidarium. In some cases, it would have kind of a warm water bath area. And in other places, it didn't have any water at all. It was an intermediate space between the Frigidarium and then what is known as the Caldarium. And the Caldarium is really, really fascinating because this is basically where you had hot water pools. Now, in some places, you would have both a sunken pool that you could soak in, or it would also just have no water and it would just be a really hot sauna-like room. Now, how do you get hot water in a bath complex? It is through what is known as a hypocaust system. So this is taking from Skytopolis or Beit Shean in Israel, for those of you who have been to this giant bath complex. And what you have here is these are clay pillars, and you have a furnace in which that is pushing heat through these clay pillars, and then you have tubuli on the walls where the heat would go up, and it's not only heating because then a floor is on top of this, the floor is being heated, but also heat is pouring in from the sides as well. And if you have a sunken pool, that water gets hot and you have a hot tub, and if you don't have that, then you just have a hot floor, and in some places they're dipping water or dropping water onto the floors, and you get steam, and now you have a sauna. And people would go back and forth between the Caldarium and the Frigidarium, hanging out in the Tepidarium. And then you would have the occasion to go into what is here is called the Palestra. This is the exercise area. This is where you would work out, work up a sweat. You would play ball games. You would lift weights. You would wrestle. This is where you exercised. Now, technically within the bathhouse, the Palestra was kind of like a separate thing, very similar to if you go into a mall, you have the food court. Okay, it is a separate thing inside the structure. Same thing with the Palestra, it was where you exercised. And then you would also have a chance to jump into, if they had it, it would be essentially an outdoor pool called the Natatio. Now, there were other things as well. There were snack bars where you could get food and wine. There were lecture halls. There were places to read, but this is the basics that you would have at a bathhouse. Now, listen to what Robert Garland says about this. He goes, apparently, not everyone approved of the baths. The Stoic philosopher Seneca the Younger, in one of his letters, goes on about people who jump into the pools making a cannonball effect, and the ones too who yank on someone's armpit hairs so that they scream out. He also objects of the cries of the sausage sellers and the sellers of bread and the sellers of drinks. Welcome to the bathhouse. Seneca seemed to live near a bathhouse and was deeply annoyed by all of this disturbance. We actually have an epitaph of Tiberius Claudius Secundus from Ephesus, who was a slave trader. He said this: baths, wine, and sex spoil our bodies, but baths, wine, and sex make up life. Most Romans would agree. Now, I want to show you just one passage in closing in connection to Paul. I have this in your notes. In fact, I have 3 passages in there. I'm going to hit the first one, and I've got some Greek going on here. It's all in your notes, so just get the gist of this last piece. This is from Ephesians chapter 4, which, as we mentioned earlier, Paul spends the first 3 chapters talking about identity, and now that he's established identity, there is calling, and with calling comes conduct. And Paul is instructing them on what is proper conduct as someone who is in Christ. As we read this, recognize Paul is talking to church people. And listen to what he writes. So I say this and affirm in the Lord that you are to no longer walk just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their minds, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. Okay, there's that hardness of heart that they are callous to. And I'm going to contend that this whole passage has the bathhouse in the backdrop. And they, having become callous, have given themselves up to indecent behavior, greedy for the practice of every kind of impurity. I have this italicized because this is the other way that you could translate this passage from the Greek. And I think this fits more of what Paul is getting at. But you did not learn Christ in this way, if indeed you have heard him and have been taught in him, just as truth is in Jesus, that in reference to your former way of life, you are to rid yourselves of the old self. Now, this word rid yourselves in Greek is the word apodyterium. And apotithemi means to remove, put aside, or take off, i.e. clothes. So hold on to that for a moment. To rid yourselves of the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit, and that you are to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, which is in the likeness of God, has been created in righteousness and the holiness of the truth. Now, when he talks about to put on, we have another clothing term that Paul is intentionally using. It is the word enduo, and it means to put on clothes. Literally, it's a clothing term. Now, that's the word enduo, and to put on, duo, clothes. You put this next to the word apoduo, which is to remove clothes, and it's where we get the word Apodyterium, which is an undressing room, which is where we get the Latin term Apodyterium. And the Apodyterium in the bathhouse is the only place in public where you would take off clothes or put clothes back on. And when Paul is saying what he is saying, and he says, take off the old self and put on the new self, Paul is talking about lust and deceit and hardness of heart. And he is saying there is a way in which you lived in your old life, but there is a new set of clothing you are to be putting on in your new life. You see, when Paul was speaking to church people, he was getting into the idea that they have new hearts, but old habits. And so often Christians try to take on the identity of Christ by wearing a set of clothes that no longer fits their status. And Paul said we need to put on the clothes that fit our status, because when Jesus enters our life, everything begins to change.